Welcome on this cold, late March evening. I'm Rachel Marston, the Associate Director of the Literary Arts Institute at the College of St. Benedict. Welcome to tonight's event, a reading by author Glick, followed by a conversation with the author. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that both the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University occupy the original homelands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. We honor, respect, and acknowledge the indigenous peoples forcibly removed from this territory whose connection remains today. St. Benedict's Monastery and St. John's Abbey previously operated boarding schools for Native children. Now, students, faculty, and staff are working to repair relationships with our Native Nation neighbors. A few reminders. Robert's book is for sale at the side of the room, at back of the room, because usually in a different space. And he will be available to sign books following the Q&A. There are a few broadsides for sale that were actually created by Robert's partner, Anne. I inverted, yes, sorry. So those are also available. Please silence your cell phones or other devices if you have not yet done so. Robert Glick is an associate professor of English at the Rochester Institute of Technology, where he teaches creative writing, digital literature, and the occasional course on zombies. His stories have been published in the Normal School, Denver Quarterly, Black Warrior Review, and the Gettysburg Review. A nonfiction piece, Shrinking the Monster, won the Diagram Essay Prize in 2013. Excerpts from his current novel project have won national competitions from Summer Literary Seminars and the New Ohio Review. Other excerpts have appeared in the Collagist, the Los Angeles Review, and in the 2018 Masters Review anthology. His first book, a collection of stories entitled Two Californias, was published by CNR Press in 2019. Robert and I have known each other for a long time. We studied at the University of Utah together, navigating the exhilarating and sometimes infuriating wilds of experimental fiction and much more. This Sunday, during the first part of Robert's visit, he told me that instead of writing an introduction, I could just read his bio and leave it at that. So taking him at his word, I will not tell you about Robert's writing, how his stories and novel reveal to us the tender, fragile hearts of characters as they grapple with loss and possibility, reconstituting their identities as they face situations from divorce and miscarriage to first love and the rapture. But to gloss his work in this way suggests only the familiar territory of psychological realism, though that is absolutely at work in his fiction, but may elide the beautifully strange and compelling ways in which Robert manipulates time and structure. Sorry, my pages are sticking together. In his fiction, and how this careful creation of non-chronological time in much of his work demonstrates more fully to us as readers how his characters navigate their own lives and the ways in which we navigate ours. I will also not tell you how, to help students explore these narrative choices, I tasked the advanced fiction writing course to create a visual and written description of specific shapes at work in the stories of Two Californias. The shapes the groups identified were waves, spiraling eyes, submerged identities, and Frankenstein's monster. What the students captured was how in different stories, and in the collection as a whole, time is often moving forward and backward. Pieces are fragmented and fractured, stitched together like the creature from Frankenstein. And like the creature, Robert's work inhabits liminal spaces, the in-betweens, and reveals to us the multiplicities of the ways in which we might tell stories and what we might gain in telling stories in different ways. I will also not tell you of the immense care that Robert takes in creating these fictional spaces, not just at the level of structure, but at the particularity of image and language, such as in this description of a dying grandmother who the narrator, a professor of zombie studies, is en route to visit. She will be lying slack and unconscious under a painting of a woman whose bare skin is the blue of deep sea water. Nonetheless, she will recognize my presence from the particles of dust that orbit slowly around her. Then she will let go, and there will be an epiphany of light, the illumination of a suburban house already preparing for her passing, the making museum of spare bedrooms, these rooms which in zombie movies turn into barricaded fortresses, wardrobes shoved up against doors. The images are working at multiple levels here. The zombie, the dead, not dead body, serves as both image and symbol, a revenant of past traumas, of navigating and understanding of the continued tension between the physical realities and decay of our bodies and the real possibility of release. I will also not tell you that Robert is a generous teacher, insightful reader, a fabulous human, and a dear, dear friend. Please join me in welcoming Robert Glick.
Thank you all so much for coming. I'm full of gratitude from the last 3-4 days for just the generosity of everybody here, the kindness, the thin mint that the shuttle driver gave me. All of these things were just amazing. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Catherine, for setting this up, for organizing for the Literary Arts Institute. Thank you to all the students with awesome questions and smiles and not hating me right away. And everybody I had dinner with, and that good conversation, which is often about writing, but then is also about life at its best. And that was, I'm still sort of processing all of those conversations at great dinners. I wanted to echo Professor Marston, Rachel's land recognition here and the gratitude I am for the land that we're on. I'm going to read for about 30 minutes with a little bit of chit chat in between. I'm going to start, actually, Rachel, you got this right. So I'm going to read the entirety of Release, which is the story Rachel quoted from, AKA Zombie 1, because those of you who read the collection know that there is a Zombie 2 later on. I'm reading it for a couple reasons. One is that it's the oldest and most directly personal story in the collection. So for me, it gets that sort of double aesthetic, but it brings me back, and I have a special connection to this. I was not a scholar of zombie studies at the time, but the general sort of movement of events in the piece are ones that resonated with me. I want to give 3 quick notes. I mean, this is for everybody, but students, that kind of thing. One, at the time I was thinking about, and this movie is long gone, but I spent a lot of time thinking about the movie Life is Beautiful. Has anybody seen Life is Beautiful? And to me, that was the first movie I'd seen that could be funny and tragic at the exact same moment. And to me, this has been a lifelong project, how to have humor and a little bit of darkness or a little bit of emotional resonance happening at the same time. And sometimes that can be really uncomfortable. You tell a joke, but you don't want to laugh, or because something else is going on. So one of the things that I was thinking about very much in this story was how that could be accomplished and how we use humor in difficult situations. The story also highlights something that I think is really important to me, which is the way that our obsessions, our jobs, our vocations structure the way we think about the world. We use them as filters. So here, what you'll hopefully see is that zombies are sort of a filter for us to think about our own lives, in addition to having lives of their own. In the novel project I've just finished, the main character is an anesthesiologist, and I can't tell you how many books I've read about anesthesiology. It's utterly fascinating and scary. But this can structure how we think about the world. And lastly, from a craft perspective, each section of this story used to be a single long sentence. So you can bear that in mind. It's not that anymore, and that was a revision process. But what I wanted to make sure happened in the story is that some of the stuff that is unorthodox or experimental, the associative thinking, which those of you who talk to me know that I'm an associative thinker, and the speed of the sentences, I will read fairly quickly to match the sentences, is anchored by the fairly straightforward plot and its linear movement. So here we go. The story is called Release. And again, I'm loud enough? Good? Okay, just wanted to make sure. I'm trapped in the middle seat of this middle-aged plane, painted to resemble Shamu the killer whale, popping honeyed peanuts into my mouth and contemplating the social significance of zombies. Specifically, I'm breaking down the epic George A. Romero tetralogy, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and Land of the Dead. Next week, I'm presenting a Zombie for Dummies lecture to freshman film students. In preparation, I'm jotting down bullet points on the drink napkin. They feed on brains, they enjoy spectacular fireworks, they're drawn to the mall because it was an important place for them. It's not easy to dumb zombies down, but I must admit that I welcome the challenge. A few minutes to gather my thoughts before I see Grandma, barely alive, downgraded to a bleached cotton slip and a diet of Chinese chicken salad. She has been hanging on for 3 days now, waiting for me to bless her leave. When I was admitted to Berkeley, her rouged cheeks brightened clown pink with pride, and I glowed at her glowing. She gifted me a super tech telephone, a phone answering machine combo that actually spoke. You have 2 new messages. I programmed her onto the first speed dial and rang her every Sunday after Face the Nation. We gabbed about how her teacher's pension bought her a new cherry red Thunderbird. One week, the phone went kaput, neither power nor dial tone. Illogical, I write on the drink napkin, that despite their doltishness, zombies manage to cut electricity to the houses they besiege. I didn't want Grandma to think I was careless with her offerings, so I wrote an outraged note, express mailed the phone right back to the factory. A month later, I received an unmarked box, the phone sheathed in plastic and sanitized with ammonia, and a form letter that said, "We regret the fact that this Panasonic's warranty does not cover infestation." The single word rubber-stamped in red ink. I was living in an anarchist collective, my black-walled room 1 floor above the vegan kitchen. Naturally, I had read Gramsci and was dubious of corporate anything, so I unscrewed the phone's back panel. In the innards, I found 4 perfectly preserved cockroach exoskeletons. Their wings veined, diaphanous, drawn to the hearth of the motor in winter. I excised the tape mechanism and hung it in the collective art gallery, kept the manual, and continued to regale Grandma with its preposterous features. I couldn't bear to tell her that her gift had failed me. My stomach has plummeted, we've started our descent, and I will not fail her. She will be lying slack and unconscious under a painting of a woman whose bare skin is the blue of deep sea water. Nonetheless, she will recognize my presence from the particles of dust that orbit slowly around her. Then she will let go, and there will be an epiphany of light, the illumination of a suburban house already preparing for her passing, the making museum of spare rooms, these rooms in which in zombie movies turn into barricaded fortresses, wardrobes shoved against doors. When you study zombies, you almost never get laid. At dinner parties, I'd unpack, quote, the Marxist implications of the dead's leaderless army, end quote. Tipsily, I'd sidle up to cute girls and tell them about my dissertation, the snappily titled, quote, Zombie Renaissance, Divining Intestines in a Post-Capital Dystopia. It functioned poorly as an icebreaker, as you might imagine, the girls more amused than beguiled. For this reason, I considered a topic shift to vampires, but quickly grew bored with the overwrought perfection of immortality. Vampire punctures delicate, their iconography ornate. As if zombies were some kind of home for me, I came back to their call. I was fascinated by them. In the pantheon of the undead, only zombies give uncensored insight into the transitional space between life, death, and rebirth. Even if you're lucky enough to watch someone die, the life cycle is all hacked up, an arrowhead more than a circle. If you're not as fortunate, if your twin brother Andy had spent 14 years in a coma, and you hadn't seen him once since you felt him go stale in your arms, and if your parents didn't tell you he had finally died until 2 weeks after, the natural conceptions of growth and decay are even more hopelessly fragmented. It's a miracle I don't compensate simply by breeding indiscriminately. In contrast, when humans are infected by zombies, you're afforded the precious opportunity to witness their return. Their eyeball may be uncoiled and boinging upside the socket. So what? You can still be liberated simply by witnessing this uninterrupted sequence. Inexorably, death leads to the zombie's tottering next step. That's why born-agains hate zombies, because they chew at the barbed wire dividing life and death. Like the trailer to the movie says, when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. On the plane, my ears just popped. The sorority girl in the cow sweatshirt is folding a stick of juicy fruit into her mouth. Does she offer me one? No. Like I said, there's no love for our kind, probably because I have slipped her drink napkin out from under her orange juice and I've scrawled, "Every dead body that is not exterminated becomes one of them. It gets up and kills. The people it kills get up and kill." The ink on the napkin overlays a map of America. The arc of flight routes looks like the migration of a virus. And the body cannot, not without help, sever itself from the brain. Hang on, Grams, hang on. Unseen peril in the dark, the flying coffin nearly clipping the canine peaks of the Tehachapi's. Though undoubtedly he will not come to the airport, I am descending dangerously close to my father. He who couldn't possibly seek shelter further from his own heart, he who tallies one son dead and the other estranged. Here's our average conversation. "Hi," I say, "it's me." He says, "I'll get your mother." I last saw him 3 years ago at my twin Andy's funeral. We had just turned 20. It was a blistering and blue-skied morning, a magnificent brightness that unnerved me the same way that people visit Auschwitz with the expectation of thunderstorms. Instead, they feel warm sun on their skin, daffodil fluff floating Pacific around them, and they interpret their discomfort as survivor's guilt. Before the funeral even started, Andy's nurses, stumpy women with glinty crosses and Kmart smocks, they were weeping in the back row like a goddamned Greek chorus. They pissed me off for 3 reasons. 1, they wailed like they knew him more intimately than I did. 2, they did. 3, they were sanding down my extreme resolve not to cry. I didn't want to cry because Mom had been crying ever since Andy's accident, as if his coma had dammed up her life and all that could sneak through was this crack, this leak of tears. Besides, it was completely ridiculous having a funeral for someone so long on life support. Not to blaspheme, but essentially, to me, he'd been dead for a while. I was dissociating once again on Dad's untucked shirt and Grandma's manicured nails. She sat next to me, dressed in silk and silver pearls, a Betty Davis, Black Widow kind of look. During the service, she whimpered in an overly dramatic way that I couldn't really fathom. I patted her hand. This, of all things, interrupted Mom's crying enough to provoke a mean, disbelieving stare that I didn't understand either. The bitter and the despondent at war in Mom's smeary, large-pored face. I was rooting for the bitter in her. Wrath, if all went well, might move something. I adjusted my tortoiseshell glasses. Rabbi Freeling was finishing off the Kaddish, Aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yamru, Amen. Grandma stood up, her calves buckled. It didn't surprise me that she crumpled to the immaculate grass. Dad had prepped me with smelling salts, and I snapped them under her nostrils. He towered over her, disgust seeping out of him like garlic, Grandma in an involuntary, quivering reflex. Then she came to. "Where am I? Where am I?" Dad was yelling at her, "You won't be satisfied unless you're the star." I helped Grandma to her feet, focused on the gleaming brass drawer handles in the wall crypts that backdrop the funeral. On the plane, I unrecline my seat and wonder exactly how zombies break out of wall crypts. Are there catches on the inside, like the anti-kidnapping latches in the trunks of new cars? Or can zombies bust out of them like Uma Thurman in Kill Bill 2? By this time, Dad had disappeared behind the acacia gardens to let off steam, and Mom had, with an unforgiving hand, let Grandma away, and everyone else had trudged sadly to their sedans. It was just me and Andy and the groundskeeper collapsing chairs. I walked over to Andy's coffin, my clip-on tie weighted down with sweat. "This is going to have to pass for goodbye," I said, running my hand along the unfinished pine coffin, my fingers gathering splinters. I apologized for not saving him, for not watching him grow up, for not being at his deathbed. A blinking red light in peripheral vision was Dad's fancy camera. He was taping his own son's funeral. It's then that I started to cry. I despised my father's patchy stubble, the stains under his armpits. Shame, pathetic and muddy brown, because our arsenal against grief was so paltry. The sunglasses and the camera and the pine box between my twin and his suitors. The groundskeeper coughed. I went and pocketed the videotape. The groundskeeper rolled Andy towards the mausoleum. The stewardesses are now strapping themselves backwards into their chairs. Electronic devices should, by force if necessary, be switched off. Sure enough, only one parent picks me up at the airport. Mom doesn't pull out from the parking spot until I fasten my seatbelt, safety being Mom's #1 priority. That's why we drive to Grandma's house in a baby blue Volvo. Every so often, when Mom's not glancing fretfully into the rearview mirror, she shifts her eyes my way, probably to see if I've lost weight, her brittle lashes blinking and blinking. She doesn't speak, I don't help her out. My hands are clutched in my lap, the uneasy silence preferable to a chuckling assessment of Grandma's charms or an attempt at parent-child bonding. We pass the Disney Studios, a 30-foot tall Mickey Mouse helium balloon tethered to a parking lot by bright red ropes. "You know Walt got frozen," I say. My voice is weirdly accusatory. Mom replies, "That's an urban legend." "No," I say, "he's beneath Disneyland in a cryogenic box right below the Pirates of the Caribbean." She accelerates onto the 134, stays in the slow lane. I look out my window at the Priuses with their bumper stickers that say, "My father went to the Republican National Convention, and all he got me was this lousy white cowl." I'm trying to wrap my head around why she so ferociously caretakes my innocence with her omissions, never having brought me on our weekly trips to visit Andy, not telling me about Grandma's imminent demise until 4 hours ago. It makes no sense to me, as if by protecting me, I wouldn't share her unnatural attachment to him, as if she innately understood that zombie children are the most dangerous. Their stunted growth capitalizes on your sympathies. You allow them close, and they nip deadly at your ankles. Mom says, "Grandma would have liked us to get one of those cryogenic boxes." Her sniffling flares her nostrils. "That's not out of nowhere," I say. Mom shakes her head. It's clearly a sequitur, and the fact that I don't get it has enraged her. Suddenly, she swipes the station wagon onto the freeway shoulder. She hasn't been this angry at me since I was 7. It was a few months after Andy's accident, after another operation had left him caved in, without the bones on one side of his skull. She had just returned from the hospital to drive carpool, and I had started a spit war with my classmates, and she pulled the Vista Cruiser station wagon over by an emergency call box. This time, she slams on the brakes, and in the front seat, we jerk forward together. "Do you know what she thought?" she screams. She thought that she could keep all disease away from her. She thought that if she didn't think about death, she would never die. I reply, "So?" My voice has a "what's your problem" sound to it. In Ayurvedic medicine, I say, if you never drink milk, you'll never be stung by mosquitoes. Maybe it's the same thing. Mom cries, "It's not the same. It's not the same." I say, "Look, not wanting to get into it. Grandma didn't like spiders either, not even Daddy Longlegs. She didn't like anything creepy. Can you really blame her for that? It's how she was. Mom reaches for a Kleenex from a flowery box. Her voice is shrill. Not once did Grandma come to see Andy in the hospital. Not once. A remarkably straight vein pulses from Mom's temple down to her jaw. She glares at me, waiting for sympathy, waiting for solidarity. I return her gaze with as much flare-eyed resentment as I can muster. Can you just take me to her, okay? I roll down the window, push my head into the smog, remembering the year after the accident. Maybe Mom and Dad were trying to conceive a replacement child and had no time for my phonics lessons. They pawned me onto Grandma and she took me to Manhattan. She had me stand atop the toilet seat in my aunt's apartment. There, out the bathroom window, stood the Empire State Building, lit up red, white, and blue like a popsicle, majestic, sparkling. Grandma's fingers curled protectively in the belt loops of my orange corduroy pants. Now, in the baby blue Volvo, I feel a vertiginous sensation, like standing up too quickly, but so pleasurable. Sullenly, Mom blows her nose. Her hands are locked at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. She crashes back into traffic, driving with a recklessness utterly new to her. My sniffling nostrils suck in the stink of oleander, that black-leaved plant that soundproofs the sides of freeways, a plant whose sole purpose is to absorb what is toxic and corrosive in this world. The stairs to Grandma's house are cracked by tree roots. Mom walks behind me, shuffling through the mail, Social Security payments, and gardening crews. I am not ready to let Grandma go. Everything in me wants escape, mindless immersion in the most juvenile constructions and contradictions of zombie life. Like, why do zombies eat brains? They can't die of starvation or thirst. They don't require 2,000 calories a day. So what's with the food necessity? Mom has to prod me before I bang the horseshoe-shaped knocker against the door. Dad lets me in, gives me a perfunctory once-over, no change in these disappeared years, to his Muppet eyebrows and hunched shoulders. I walk by him without saying hello, into a living room full of Louis XIV sculptures and other slender sculptures of naked women. Mom sits herself primly down on a piano bench. I guess they don't kiss when in crisis. Her heart is failing, Dad says, sighing out each word as if reticent to burn energy on me. And there's fluid backing up in her lungs. He's wearing a red Izard shirt, collar dusted with dandruff. Which means, I ask, basically, she's drowning. I walk down the hall. Dad says, nice talking to you. The house doesn't smell of old people. It smells worse, unchanged, still the sweet lavender from the French soaps in the guest bathroom, the smell of pears. I make the turn into Grandma's well-lit room. She looks so shrunken, so animal now. I smile because I am here, though her eyes are closed, and a terrible sound is gurgling from inside her. Each shallow exhale bubbles up like a percolator. I reach the edge of the bed, slide my hand under her chalky fingertips. Already she's crumbling to dust. I wait for her to acknowledge my presence, for her bony shoulder to ripple some notation, for her filmy eyelids to twitch. In the backyard, there's the paint-faded totem pole that I used to slam into, head first, at full speed, to try and bring Andy's coma upon myself. In the living room, Dad's voice is piped up an octave. He's haranguing Mom about coffin costs. I hear Mom shh him. For some minutes, I wait. When Grandma does not give me a sign, I whisper, I'm with you now. I'm grateful for everything you did for me. Did you know you saved me? I think I feel her relax, her body settling imperceptibly into the sheet, and this brings me endless joy. It's a terrible time for Mom and Dad to stomp back in. I crane my head around. Mom's drinking a Diet Coke, looking demurely at the carpet. Dad says, it might take a day or two. I'll stay here tonight. But obviously Grandma's ready to die. She's shutting down. Dad knows it too. I can tell the way he's lying by the way he minds his ear for wax. I say, I just got here. He says, Johnny, as if he must make me diminutive. You should go home with Mom. I give him a skeptical look, one eyebrow up. I promise, he adds, I promise. Digging into his ear. She'll still be around tomorrow. I hear the heavy water bubbling in Grandma's lungs. I'm not going anywhere, I say. What, whines Dad? You're gonna go on strike? You're gonna chain yourself to the bed? Mom says, the ficus needs watering, I'll see to that. She takes her color-coded keys from her purse and leaves the room. I force myself to breathe as if the air is so stagnant that it can no longer move into my lungs. You don't get it, I say to Dad. I want to be here. Outside, the hummingbirds are twitting at the sugar water in the feeder. They peck at the blood-colored liquid with their beaks and pull back so sharply they have to rebalance their claws on the feeder's edge. Johnny, yells Dad. He actually stamps his foot, but it's an impotent thud. I get now that he is desperate. He needs her all to himself. Soon she will turn, and he knows that zombies inevitably betray those who love them in life. They leave us behind. We are no longer able to prove ourselves worthy of their love, yet we believe they can still redeem us. And this makes us reckless to regain our humanity in the maggoty face of their disappointment. Please, my father says, please. His palms are open and tremoring. It shocks me, but for once I feel compassion for him. I don't belittle his tyrant shtick. Fine, I tell him, I'll go home. It's like a gift. The brokenness instantly drains out of him. Goodbye, I say to Grandma. I kiss her cheek. I feel her wrinkles on my lips. I breathe in her parchment smell. Grandma, with her gaunt skull and shrewd nose, everything spiteful and gorgeous and almost gone. I am about to whisper in her ear, it's okay, you can go, I release you, but I can't, I won't. She is not mine to release. Okay, shifting gears just a little bit. Moving from Two Californians to two short sections from a novel that I've just finished up, whose name keeps changing every week. So it started as The Paradox of Wonder Woman's Airplane, and then it became Asterisms, which is still in all like the materials. And then somebody was like, that sounds cool, but nobody knows what that means. That's probably not a great title. And so today it's a constellation we thought we had charted, which is way too long, but we'll talk about that later. So a little bit of info on this novel that will set up the two short sections. From a plot perspective, it's the story of the Deckel family. At the beginning of the novel, the mother, Grace, who is 40, unexpectedly becomes pregnant and has a subsequent miscarriage. The miscarriage is off screen, but in these sections it is partially described at times, so a content warning here regarding miscarriage. Most of the book explores the messy, startling ways the family members move on from the miscarriage, particularly since the husband, Chuck, really wants another child, while Grace is quite ambivalent about it. The book starts off relatively normal, and I'm reading two sections from the sort of start of the book that are not particularly weird. But by the end of the novel, people are chloroforming their relatives, they're stealing expensive things from their cousins, they're getting into Ponzi schemes selling personal fallout shelters, they're creating dangerous performance art with Bosnian immigrants, and they're figuring out what happens to all the pets if there's a rapture. So it goes off the rails a little bit. As I mentioned this in Professor Marston's class. One thing that was really challenging in Two Californias was that most of the protagonists of the stories are men, so you have male narrators, and then there's a lot of them, and we lovingly call the collection Boys Who Need Hugs, because there's lots of boys who need hugs in the collection. But this was a challenge for me because I wasn't really comfortable with that, and I wanted to know how I could work different kinds of voices in. So in this book, each of the four main characters, two men and two women, the two parents, the heteronormative parents, and the two kids, each get their own voice and they each get their own narrative. So the hope here is that by writing collective documents, things that are collectively narrated, you get, and doing it well or doing it complexly, then you can open up some of these complex spaces, and especially kind of writing of otherness in particular. So that is happening in the book. The novel isn't quite linear. Chapters told by different narratives overlap each other, but what I want to do here is read two short sections that actually take place at the same time. So you get two different voices, the two teenagers, Jess and Russ. And just to set you up here, it's a few days after the miscarriage, and they learn that their Uncle Mort has passed away, and they've decided that Chuck and Jess are going to go to the funeral in Phoenix, while Russell stays home with Grace, his mother. We're going to start with Jess. This chapter is called the Hyaline Layer, and the Hyaline Layer is, okay, let me explain. Jess's nickname is the Little Scorpion, because when she is under pressure, she gets cruel. And through the book, she wonders whether this is something that's innate or sort of cultural, can it be changed? But she's sort of saddled with this nickname. The hyaline layer is the substance in scorpions that allows them to bioluminesce. So many of you may know that scorpions bioluminesce when under light. They're actually fluorescent or certain kinds. So that's what that's about. All right. And those of you who've read Susan Steinberg's work, anybody? Rachel, is anybody teaching? What you're going to see here is that lots of short sentences and short paragraphs like in Susan Steinberg's work. So this idea that you can write short paragraphs and they have their own gravitas, rather than having this uninterrupted flow like in Release where things kind of pile on each other. You got this a lot more white space here. All right, and these are very short, so don't be scared. All right, so this is from the middle of the hyaline layer. Also, my great Uncle Mort died. I barely knew him. All I knew was that he had these coughing jags explosive enough to terrorize my younger self. Still, I asked to go with Dad to Phoenix since things couldn't get worse here. At first, I was wrong, as Dad kept being Dad. He reprimanded me not to take pictures of the placard above the cash register. We're in Phoenix here, which read, "Kindly hang your hat with your gun." "Who's going to get us in more trouble, me or you?" I chastised. "You pluck nose hairs in front of the Starbucks barista." I wound up on the roof that night, chatting with some rando about fake palm trees. When Dad returned from the hotel pool, he was soaked, his jeans dripping wet. No reason at all. On the day of the funeral, the thermometer was going to burst. I didn't even know how to feel sad. Everything anyone did embarrassed me. He was my peas and carrots, my great Aunt Edith said about Mort, his war medals tucked in the pocket of his dress. My dad and his doppelganger, Sandy's husband Bruce, kept jostling like two Flemish rabbits stuffed into a shoebox. Seriously, Bruce wore a Spider-Man t-shirt to the funeral. Then something changed. By the time my sunken cousin William and his boyfriend drove us back to the hotel, Dad was in a weirdly jovial mood. He couldn't stop smiling. He insisted that the bag with Mort's keepsakes stay in his lap. He literally held his fist with his other hand, as if he was afraid that his arm would detach itself and hitch a ride back to Bruce's house to punch him in the jaw. That night, he sat on my springy bed and he told me a story. During a sock war with a friend, hiding behind some kind of cushion fort, he almost choked on a peppermint. His own dad, rather than sympathizing with him, chided him about his inattention to the weaknesses of the larynx. He didn't care that his son had to self-Heimlich against the back of an office chair. He sort of wanted my dad to solve the problem, even at the risk of grievous bodily harm. My pop's answer to everything, Dad said, was do more. But sometimes you can't do more. Sometimes it's bad luck or not up to you. Like, for instance, no matter how hard I try, things aren't perfect at home, not by a moonblast. He told me that he had been sleeping in the guest room, the baby's room, he called it. He apologized for not getting me and my friend at the corn maze, admitted that he was messed up. Fiercely at that moment, I started to love him again for letting what was obvious be obvious. You think we're stupid, I said. Of course we knew. That was when I told him how it was only me with Mom when she lost the baby, how I was there when she stood up and took off her pants and inspected herself, and how at first I wouldn't help her when she was in so much pain. How could I do that? Mom, like a wounded animal, and how maybe my slow driving made her lose the baby, and how even now I couldn't be in the same room with her, like when after you puked, you couldn't stand whatever food made you sick. What was wrong with me? Why did I have to be so hard? It hurt all of us, he said, but you, my daughter, you had to witness it. The moment is inside you now. I nodded because it was, and I cried, and my father rubbed my back until I fell asleep. Okay. So this last little section is from Russ's perspective. He's supposed to be on restriction, but he sneaks out. And he is going to this abandoned house that he and his friends have colonized, that they've been hanging out at as a way to like get away from everything. What Russ doesn't know is that his friends have filled a can of SpaghettiOs with rocks and put it on top of a door, and he's walked in, and it has concussed him, and he's been knocked out for a small period of time. So this takes place right after that. I wasn't out long. When I came to, I was lying on the couch. Oh, one thing I should say. Sorry. So there's the abandoned house, and on the side of the house, what immediately sort of drew him into the house is that there is a boat in dry dock there on wooden sawhorses. Okay, start again. I wasn't out long. When I came to, I was lying on the couch. The lights were off. I could feel a dried trickle of blood down my neck, another behind my ear. My head hurt so bad. I took out my phone, even that much light hurt. In an update from Jess, Dad and Bruce had nearly come to blows again, and Uncle Mort's ancient parrot had gotten free of its cage. Jess had also texted me, "Pinwheel is a go, first up, Xanax. My heart flutters in so many ways. Thanks for listening. I suspect that you're a good brother." She and her friend had built an algorithm not as a joke, but to determine their own drug usage. Slowly I stood up, tracked the sound of voices and rushing water around to the side of the house. "He's alive!" yelled Rob and Ron, who sat in 2 of the 4 folding chairs that faced the boat. There were open PBRs in each cup holder. "You guys are dicks," I said. "We know," said Filbert. "We're sorry. I'm sorry. We were going to warn you about the SpaghettiOs trap. Obviously you got there first, and the rest is history. We're going to make it up to you, though." I sat, chugged half a beer. One of them had cranked on a garden hose, made the small gully beneath the sawhorses, supporting the depth of field. The depth of field is the name of the boat. Supporting the depth of field into a rivulet, a mini stream. Filbert handed me the flamethrower, or more specifically, the spray bottle, which was connected via a tube to a propane tank. Rob and Ron played fanfare from detuned air trumpets. "Dial it down," I said. "Sorry," they said. "It's perfect," said Filbert, looking at the propane tank. "Strength, length, direction, aperture, everything." "What do you want me to do with it?" I asked. "You know exactly what to do," said Filbert, motioning towards the boat. Ron lobbed a one-armed doll up and over the side. Rob threw a hair-clumped brush over. Filbert shot-put something heavy into the boat. It was the lockbox to his house, which his parents had just put up for sale. "Arrivederci," he said. "Now burn it down." I didn't want to burn the boat because it wasn't ours to burn. "No," I said, "everything could go wrong. A stray spark would send the weeds ablaze, a brush fire to flatten the state, the huge oil rigs spraying out flame over the plains, storks in the sand dunes charring to coal, the grains of sand clumping and black glassing, our scalps burnt to bubble and pop, the splintering planks sharp and bloody against our forearms and our ankles. Trust me," Filbert said, "nothing will ever go wrong." I thought about Filbert dealing with his brother and with him being forced to move away, and how maybe burning everything down was the only way to make up for what you were losing. And then I thought that destruction was also transformation. How, as Dad had taught me, carbon turned to coal or diamond. Or how Mom took all my rubber dinosaur toys, scooped up a half-cylinder out of the top of the Triceratops or Raptor, and made them into the tiny planters that were still scattered through the house. I went up to the boat. Filbert followed me with the propane tank. I pulled the handle of the spray nozzle, and Filbert lit the match. Flame ran down the length of spaghetti. It whooshed out to the hull. Waves of heat blasted my forehead. When the wood started to wisp and smoke, we formed a processional, with Ron and Rob still tooting some classical march. I got into it, spraying flame at the hull like an exterminator, remembering that old bug ad with the top hat guy who hid a mallet behind his back. Finally, Filbert gave me another beer. We sat down and watched the boat really start to burn. The blurry sting of the smoke made my eyes water, and the popping of the wood made my headache even worse, and the paint fumes sent cramping waves of nausea at me. I didn't care. It was magnificent. Strips of wood bowed and peeled and curled. The lockbox refused to melt. The sawhorses caught on fire and collapsed, which allowed the boat to drop onto the stream, which splashed us but wasn't deep enough, so the boat broke in the same way that a cardboard box breaks open in every direction when dropped from an attic window. Sparks swarmed above us. We looked at each other, and we didn't need to say awesome or that's so cool, because we didn't have to. We were fully occupying this moment, this shared undoing and reforming. I needed to capture it. I felt the most intense love for everyone, my friends, my family, even for me. So what did I do? With my hands, like a movie director, I framed the burning depth of field, Orion in the background, crackling bright. Thank you. How do you want to do this?
Well, we have a microphone, but I can bring that around to people, or you can repeat people's questions.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Somebody's got to have questions. Questions? Matt.
So I've got to know, what is an asterism?
An asterism, there's three. I'm going to give you the primary definition. All three work. An asterism is a grouping of stars that we know but is not officially named by the Greeks. So the Big Dipper is an asterism. Orion's belt is an asterism. So obviously what you get here is the sense that families can be, if sort of constellations are things we know and are formed, that we can reform shapes of stars in whatever way we want. It also is a typographic thing for our book artists in the look, and it's a grouping of three asterisks in a triangle. When you look at the book, this is totally stupid, but all of the section breaks are asterisms. Okay. So there you go. That was an easy question. Yes. Well, as a side note, and Rachel knows this, I've been working on talking to agents, and I thought I had the best letter of all time, and it didn't really work out at first, and I sent it to somebody who worked at Simon & Schuster for 10 years, and she was like, this is terrible. And I was like, it's so well written, I'm smart, I have a PhD. And she was like, this is an academic letter. You don't sell a book with an academic letter. And academics might love the title, Rachel, but nobody else will have a clue what it is. So there you go. Rachel.
I'm a little bit, but I'm just going to ask this question.
Yes.
And I know the students have things to say, but could you talk some about the strategies that you use to help distinguish the voices from each other in the novel? Because especially, I know there's differences in character, but if they're all first-person narrators.
Yes. Part of it is vocabulary and what people know, but a big part in this book is narrative style. So what you'll see in Jess's is these short paragraphs. They're usually subject-verb, I did this or this happened. They're not complex structures. Russell has a lot more similes and metaphors, and Grace's narrative is told interview style. So those are some ways that I wind up doing it. Grace is also much more dissociative, so it's the number of digressions, the number of interior spaces. so I'm doing a lot of that, but it's not voice-driven in the way that many novels are voice-driven, where it's dialect or slang or regional vocabulary. That's not really how it's moving. Yeah, does that answer that a little bit?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Thank
You
you.
know.
I think it's interesting too, because families can often have, even though they're going to have different, can develop similar speech patterns
Yes.
to each other.
Yeah, and they're all a little bit snarky. Question up, please. Students, you're under pressure. Yeah.
How did you know you wanted to be a writer? What got you involved in
A couple of things. I mean, I was an English major. Yay, English majors. Woo. So I'd spent a bunch of years, thinking books, thinking writing, all this stuff. But then it got personal. What happened was that my brother died, the brother that is sort of referred to here, and I had no clue how to deal. And so this is a terrible trope, stereotypic story, but I wanted to write, the novel that fixed everything, that was about that. And that took me a number of years, and it was not a good novel, but for me, it was really personal. Yes, I loved language, but I needed to figure something out. And it was probably, I won't say it was worse for me, but I had this question in front of me. How are you supposed to deal with the death of somebody who is in a coma for, however many years? That's weird. Doesn't happen to most people. You live with it day after day, and it's sort of like hiding back there. So all of a sudden, I had like a set of interests and a plot. So I was like, thank you very much for the plot. So that's how it got started, and it just kept happening. One piece is that I was doing IT work for like 10 or 15 years while this was happening. And at some point I was like, I need to go back to school and do this. It was a need. It was not a want. My relationship with words, and this, for everybody, it doesn't have to be words. It can be, whatever thing you're into. But in some ways, I didn't feel like I had a choice. Yeah, Matt.
I was going to ask a little bit about, what you were talking about earlier when you were introducing the work about the impulse to blend or to have like a counterpoint at least.
Yeah.
Something that's sort of serious and yet something that's also comical.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. I think you're doing it's amazing. And so I was going to ask, and then you were giving the other sort of comment about
Yep.
kind of the progress. I was going to ask when you discovered that was something that you were doing naturally, or that you wanted to do deliberately.
Yeah.
And I don't know, and this may not be it, but I kind of thought, wow, the story of the source material that you're working
Yeah.
with, which is obviously heavy.
Yeah.
Right? And so is that how it came about, or did it sneak up on you?
You mean the humor stuff or the,
I think
yeah.
the idea of keeping them both kind of
Yeah.
suspended at the
Okay.
same time.
Yeah, I can't remember because my memory is terrible. And you'll notice that when I say humor, my characters are not telling jokes, right? And it's not even like dramatic humor. It's not it's the fact that we walk around the world and there's funky, weird things around us all the time, and we think funky, weird things all the time. Now, they may not sit, but they're there. They're these little micro things. And we often don't realize how absurd they are. If you said to your zombie expert, you know that you're dealing with your grief, you should really see a therapist for that instead, right? Rather than think about zombies. But I'm stuck with zombies, right? So I don't think I try to do it, but it comes as a natural outcrop of the fact that we do unexpected things and they make no sense, right? We wind up in places, we wind up in a corn maze 3 days after the mother has had a miscarriage, and then stuff happens because life still happens, right? So I think it was more out of this sort of noticing and that kind of space than, I don't sit down and go, how can I be funny today? And when I'm talking about humor, what I'm talking about is the fact that what happened when I first started writing is that this is probably not you, you're probably like, you say you're funny and you're really not funny. But like that you have these moments where the audience starts to laugh and then they stop themselves because they're like, I'm not supposed to laugh at that. Right? And I'm gone, right? I'm already to the next sentence. I'm like, you don't get to stay there. So it was really, this is sort of more organic than it's something that I sat there and thought I'm taking humor classes, something like that. I'm not a good joke teller. Did that answer that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yes, please.
Yeah, so yesterday in class you mentioned that your publisher or other publishers, people gave you a lot of pushback for trying to like normalize
Yeah.
what it was you were writing. How do you handle that professionally, and then also how do you embrace like the more quirky, weird stuff in the editing process to keep your work authentic to you, but also
The first question was, how do you handle the desire for people to normalize? And the answer is with lots of tears, crying. And sometimes, to be honest, it's like a fist against the world. Like they want to make me normal. It's like I'm in a Metallica song or something. But, I'm like, the world is trying to make me this sort of like, So that's part of it, is that you develop a sort of skin to that. But what it comes from, this may not answer your question, but one thing I learned, my training is in experimental fiction with Rachel. And one thing that experimental fiction, reading it does, there's two things that it does. Well, it does more than that. One is it says, hey, it's only culture that says that this is normal and this is weird. Right? So that thing that you think is so strange is strange only because it's in response to a normative set of craft-based laws. So once you realize that, like really language is, if we thought about language like we thought about paint, then we would have lots of different kinds of stories told in different ways, right? We can have thin paint, we can have thick paint, we can have narrative painting, we can have abstract painting. It can be real thick and gooey, it can be real glossy. You could pretend it's a window on the world, whatever it is. If we thought about words that way, we would have a lot of different kinds of stories. But then you have a belief in that, right? This belief that we should be telling all kinds of stories in all kinds of ways, and that makes experimental, it means you have a faith in what you're doing. And that makes it easier to work with people who don't have that experience. And then part of your work isn't for me to make you cry or make you laugh, but make you understand that there's different kinds of stories. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who's a difficult subject right now for many ways, but in The Dangers of a Single Story. Anybody watch that or seen that? Right, she talks about this multiplicity of stories being necessary. What she doesn't talk about is that it's also true for how stories are told. Or she doesn't talk about it formally as much. She's talking about the content of stories primarily. So it's having a real faith that you can change people's world also by the way that a word works, the way a mind works, things like that. And that makes it easier. There's always going to, of course, when you're dealing with the economics of publishing, there is going to be a normalizing impulse. Right? Nobody's going to buy your book at a big publisher unless they are very convinced that it's going to sell a lot of copies. So you have to have that kind of faith, that it's okay. All right. Yes, hi.
So with respect to the stories you have written so far,
Yes.
do you try to make each story stand on its own, or do you try to connect? So for example, do you try to connect two Californians with the novel?
I won't, there are moments in Two Californias where I was aware of one story and I did something small in another story to try to give it a certain kind of connectivity, but I at least probably won't do that between books. Mostly. Let me give, it is possible that I may write one book that's sort of an outcropping from another book, but it's not like thematically I'm trying to connect them. There may be others. Can anybody think of people who try to work sort of as, their books, not as a trilogy, but like as a set of thematic concerns? Yeah. Louis Erdrich. Okay. And are you thinking content here, or like, like she comes back to the same spaces?
I'm forgetting the full title of it. It's my favorite though. It's that one with the outpost, like the last message from, or I forget the outpost, but there'll be like references. You'll have like a character that appears in one book, and then like there might be central.
Right.
Tie back, and just so you're part of the same world.
Right.
Not
Right.
outside
Yeah.
the trilogy, in some other books or commercial stories.
Right.
Just get like
Right, so you have writers who are tying things, if I'm hearing this right, through shared characters. Philip Roth did this, right, with Zuckerman. I think that's right. Faulkner does this, and some people have the same concerns in every book, and it just looks a little bit different. And I guarantee you, if there was ever a literary critic who looked at a person's work, they would be able to see things that come from place to place. Even in this, it's like, my dads are always picking at themselves. No, and it's like in any story, your dads are picking at themselves. And you see these kinds of repetitions that you're unaware of, but I haven't been trying to do that, which is perfectly valid if you did. Yeah. Yeah.
This actually follows well. So there's kind of two layers to this question, but I'll ask the most straightforward one. In general, and no, but Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were talking about your desire or this idea that you would be able to write this novel,
Yeah.
and that would somehow bring closure or kind of complete.
Yeah.
Or, it just made me think about the Decameron, how as a group of young people
Yeah.
in Florence, one thing we notice is that the more stories they tell, the more dead bodies begin to surface in their stories.
Mm.
And fragmented bodies,
Yeah.
bodies that die terribly, bodies of the dead come back in dreams.
Right.
I had never thought of those as zombies before.
Mm.
And now we're talking about, oh. And
Yeah.
so I was thinking that, I don't know if that happens to you in writing when you feel like I'm starting a whole new thing.
Yeah.
But I've already written about
Yeah.
this beloved person, I'm moving on now.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, they resurface in your writing.
Yeah.
In some way. And I didn't know if that happened to you or.
I think it probably does, but I'm not sure how aware I am of it. And that's one thing about revision. Students, it's then that you become aware of these things and you get to leverage them. You get smarter about them by spending time away from your work and then being able to see it with open eyes. I mean, I can tell you that in the novel, there's not really stuff on zombies, I've deprecated it, but there's this question of like Marvel universe and apocalypse fantasies. Why are we so into apocalypse stuff over the last 10, 15 years? And there are some really good reasons. So I started, and that's not very far away from zombies, right? Although it should be said that in the first zombie movies, it was not at apocalyptic level. These were local phenomena. It's only a little bit more recently that they're posed in film as global phenomena. Even World War Z, which was a sort of this weird modular book before it was a movie, was like little incidents here and there rather than this kind of global extinction scenario. Totally not best movie Brad Pitt ever did. How are we doing on time? Who's got the last word on this one? Nobody. Everybody's too afraid of the last word.
I know, the minute I say that.
Yep. Yes. Hi.
When it comes to your writing and everything, what was your biggest inspiration in terms of other writers?
It depended on the story. I mean, I wish I could remember, but what I will say is I'll try to think of, I'm buying time right now so I can think of something. Because you're reading a lot, there's always inspiration happening if you let it happen, right? Even in stories you don't like, students, even if you hate something, find 2 things in it that you can use, right? And that not only gets you more stuff in your toolbox, but it also probably makes you hate it a little less because you take the time to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And sometimes the things you hate are the ones that can help you the most because you have to ask why you hate them. Inspiration-wise, I'll say the one thing I think I said in one class. Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison's one of the first people I ever heard who talked about telling stories differently. What we know through narrative theory, or what people argue through narrative theory, is that there's very few plots. Most plots are related to each other. You're probably not going to think of a brand new plot. What you are going to do is fashion a world of words differently than anybody ever has, in different orders. So especially Beloved, but also The Bluest Eye. Those were books. And to be honest, and this is completely appropriative, Native American writers, most of whom, who have had big contracts over the last 20 years, are working with not alternative. That's the problem. They're not alternative forms. Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko, Almanac of the Dead, Karen Te Yamashita's I Hotel. Things like that are able to move me deeply. And now that's not what everybody wants, right? But able to move me deeply, but are told in ways that I'm not used to. I won't go into this more, but also science fiction. Science fiction lets us imagine futures. This is good. Most are good. Some are bad. You got the last word. That's awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.